Phase one, first muster a great deal of capital. They moved $1 trillion extra to OPEC from the United States and Western Europe in that 18-month period. First muster a great deal of capital, and they did that. Phase two was an attack on the stock market. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was 14,100 in October of 2007. In March of 2009, 18 months later or so, in March 2009, it was 6,500 on the Dow. 14,100 to 6,500. Biggest drop since the Great Depression. Made in 1973-74, which is a painful bear market, made it look like a walk in the park. It was a terrible destruction of wealth. $50 trillion worth of global wealth disappeared during that period. What caused it? Well, Spooky Dude gives us an idea. He said in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, he said that AIG, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and others were destroyed by bear raids in which the shorting of stocks and the buying of credit default swaps mutually amplified and reinforced each other. The unlimited shorting of stocks was made possible by the abolition of the uptick rule, which was abolished in 2007, and the unlimited shorting of bonds was facilitated by the credit default swap market. Now, the reason I point him out is, remember, in this book here, the Chinese said he is the #1 expert on financial warfare. In fact, they called him a financial terrorist. He said, who among us can deny that George Soros is a financial terrorist? Now, I'm not calling him that. We're being recorded, and Mr. Soros, I don't want you to sue me. I'm not calling you that, but that's what the Chinese authors called you. And he says, as the foremost expert on economic warfare, he says that it was a bear raid. Remember that word, and remember shorting and credit default swaps. So what makes unlimited shorting? First, how many people here are familiar with the idea of shorting stocks? Good handful of you. Shorting stocks is fine. I have no problem with it. It's legal, it's acceptable, it's actually good for the markets. What I have a problem with is the evil twin brother of shorting, which is known as naked shorting. Now, I'm not talking about you going home and sitting at your E-Trade account in your underwear and shorting stocks. That's not naked shorting. Naked shorting is what you do is you actually, when you short sell a stock, you borrow shares from your broker, you sell them on the open market. If the price goes down, you buy them back cheaper, and you deliver back the loan. You pay back the loan of shares you borrowed. It's legal, it's acceptable. You can do that. You borrow shares, you sell them, the price goes down, you buy the shares back, and you return the debt. You pay it off. That's fine. Naked shorting just skips that first part of borrowing the shares. You just sell. Now, how many of you all could go sell something you don't own? Don't borrow. There's a saying on Wall Street, he who sells what isn't his'n buys it back or goes to prison. That's the saying on Wall Street. If you sell something you don't own and haven't borrowed, you ought to go to jail. But that's not what actually happened. This is Rolling Stone magazine. It says, what you do when you naked short sell is you sell large quantities of stock that you don't have, you flood the market with counterfeit shares, and that depresses the price, and then it makes the shares less valuable. How many people know this? Probably half, at least 30%, not more than 70%, but probably half of the decline in the price of Lehman Brothers was caused by naked shorting. It says failed trades from naked short selling. Now, why is it called failed trades? Because if you don't borrow shares and you don't own shares and you sell them, you don't have anything to deliver. It's called failed to deliver. Failure to deliver. If you fail to deliver the shares, that's a naked short sell. That was at least 30% and maybe 70% of the decline in Lehman's stock price. This is what triggered the collapse. And that's what George Soros said. Remember, I showed you that. On September 11th, 2008, there were 22,625,385 failed to deliver shares. Somebody sold 23 million shares of Lehman Brothers and didn't show up with the stock on September 11th. That was a 1,600-fold increase from what it was before. It just spiked on September 11th. Then by September 15th, Lehman Brothers fell to 21 cents. There were like 100 million shares somebody sold that didn't own. that just destroyed Lehman Brothers' share price. Now, I'm not saying Lehman wasn't in trouble. They were in trouble. They had problems, no doubt, but they could have survived. Bear Stearns survived. Bear Stearns is now operated under J.P. Morgan Chase today. Lehman didn't survive. Here's the spike. Do you see that spike? This is average daily settlement fails across all U.S. capital markets from The Economist magazine. This is September 11th week. It went from an average of about 20 million shares a day, or $20 billion a day, $20 billion of settlement fails a day, to almost 600 billion the week of September 11th. An enormous increase. And so The Economist mentions a report on economic warfare that the Pentagon commissioned in 2009. That's my report. And they said settlement flaws could be used by terrorists to destabilize financial systems. So how did they do it? Well, the firms used obscure loopholes in regulations that allowed them to short companies by trading in shadows or echoes of real shares. They manipulated rules to avoid having to disclose these failed trades to regulators. And they used one rule in particular. It was one rule. It was named after a very famous gentleman named Bernie Madoff, who, when he was at the NASD, convinced the SEC to allow market makers to short sell stock without borrowing, naked short sell, as long as they were going to clean it up later on. Madoff's name was so well known that they created the exemption, the reprieve from naked short selling restrictions, and called it the Madoff exemption. Forbes went on to say, the point is that this was my practice prior to the time that I fell into my crime of staying naked short. So, on September 19th, the SEC puts out a press release, and they say, you know what, short selling's killing our market. We're going to ban all short selling across the board. And they did. That was very unusual, and they did it in the United Kingdom as well. Well, Barry Ritholtz, who writes the Big Picture blog and knows Wall Street pretty well, he's an absolute genius on hedge funds and so forth, he puts out in his blog, remember the term I gave you from Soros, the bear raids? The bear raids on the banks and brokers were not a case of piling on by US-based hedge funds. It was coming from London and Dubai. It was coming on the anniversary of 9/11. Is anyone investigating if this is financial terrorism? August 9th, 2007, Sheikh Yusuf Talal de Lorenzo, I showed you his name earlier, who said the collapse of capitalism is necessary. He worked with Barclays Bank and Sharia Capital to create a new type of short selling called an Arbun transaction using the Madoff exemption, as far as I can tell, that allowed Sharia compliant funds, particularly those in the Middle East, to short sell American banks. They got their permission August 9th, 2007. So what happened? The bear raids through obscure firms. All of Wall Street is this red bar trading. And this is two obscure firms you've probably never heard of. They have more trading than all the rest of Wall Street combined. Those two firms were trading on behalf of the Middle East clients. You start with the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Notice this is from the Unrestricted Warfare Symposium put on by the Pentagon. You start with the Sovereign Wealth Fund. This is a target company, and you hide all your trades. That's exactly what the Chinese said you should do. Did you know there were 5,000 complaints of naked short selling and 0 actions of enforcement by the SEC, according to a report put out by the Inspector General of the SEC, David Kotz, who went on to say that they have recognized that fraudsters can use naked short selling to engage in illegal market manipulation by selling stock short and failing to deliver shares at the time of settlement with the purpose of driving down the stock price. The only thing you add to that is you do it against an important company, a systemic company like Lehman Brothers, which, by the way, you look at the literature in the Middle East and they were so excited to see this American Jewish investment bank be destroyed. Throughout the Middle East, they were purposely attacking an American Jewish bank to hopefully destroy our economy. And that's not the only weapon they used. They also used this weapon, credit default swaps, which I'm not going to go into the same detail to tell you, except credit default swaps are like insurance. It's an insurance that you're going to pay your debt. So if I loan money to somebody and they didn't think I was worth it, they might go buy from some insurance company or some other individual a guarantee that if I didn't pay my debt, that the bank would pay for them. What happened is Lehman Brothers was borrowing money like crazy because they had problems, and so was Bear Stearns, and so were the big banks. And AIG stepped up and said, we'll insure your debt, we'll insure your debt, we'll insure your debt. The problem is that you could buy insurance even if you didn't loan money. You had no capital at risk. So it is essentially like buying fire insurance on your neighbor's house. You create an incentive to burn down the house. And here's what happened in New Orleans. At one point in history, I've been told, and I have to look it up to validate it, but I was told at one point that they allowed you to buy life insurance on people you didn't know, and they were shocked to find that murder rates went up. So people could bet against Lehman Brothers and hope that they go out of business. Somebody made a ton of money when AIG paid off with your money all that insurance when Lehman Brothers failed. Much of it went to big banks in Europe. Here's the credit default swap rates. They spiked up. This is when Bear Stearns failed. This is when Lehman Brothers failed. That's because they had all those payoffs. So when Lehman Brothers collapsed, that was 9/11/2008, naked short selling increased 1,600-fold. Barclays Bank, one of the only a handful of banks in the United States or Europe that turned down government sponsorship, government money. Barclays Bank rejected TARP. Did you know that they had 53% controlling interest was eligible to Qatar and Abu Dhabi, two sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East? Barclays didn't buy Lehman. They were supposed to buy Lehman. They chose not to. The reason they said was our shareholders wouldn't support it. Who were their primary shareholders? Qatar and Abu Dhabi. Global stock markets collapsed when they refused to buy Lehman. Barclays then bought Lehman assets out of bankruptcy and booked a $4 billion profit in less than 3 months on those assets. And then Abu Dhabi and Qatar pulled out $5 billion from Barclays in early 2009. When Lehman Brothers failed, the entire system started to collapse, according to Spooky Dude. Since then, we've had new risks. We've had a flash crash, Europe has gone under attack, and now the end game is in play. For example, you remember when the Dow dropped 1,000 points and nobody could tell you why? 6 minutes time, the Dow is down 1,000 points and nobody understands it. High frequency trading is what caused that. Computer trading. Don't think you can hack computer trading? Well, this guy, supposedly, he was arrested, convicted, sent to prison, then he was released, and now he is being charged again with stealing Goldman Sachs trading codes and posting them on a German server. What happens if you've got the trading codes? Well, you can alter trading algorithms and cause a market crash. So, Soros comes back, and this is in early 2010. He launches an attack against Greece. He has an ideas dinner, and he says, hey, Greece is our new target. They were going to go after Dubai, but Dubai got bailed out. Dubai had all kinds of problems. You know, they built indoor snow skiing arenas, right? They had all kinds of financial problems. They got bailed out. When they got bailed out, the financial community said, we can't attack the Middle East, let's attack Greece. They had an ideas dinner. In fact, on February 2010, the day they held their dinner, the cost of insurance for Greek debt was $420. By March 2012, the rate had spiked to $25,960. If you bought Greek credit default swaps when they had that ideas dinner and sold them in March of this year, you increased from $420 to $26,000. That's a big jump. So the Greek spy agency said, hey, we've got speculators that are looking at our markets and trying to destroy our markets. The Germans basically said, you're right, that's exactly what's happened. And in fact, when bin Laden was killed, on his person they found a document titled A Strategy Concept for Destroying the Economies of Europe. So what did the German government do? They banned naked short selling and naked credit default swaps, the two things I said were weapons. They banned those. Now in America, we want to ban guns. Germans banned naked credit default swaps, and you know what? There's more devastation caused by these instruments than guns. As tragic as what happened last week was. Okay, here's Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff is a well-known financial advisor. He says, I hear a lot of people are worried about Europe and say, as soon as Europe gets fixed, then things will get better. Here's my concern. I join Peter in this. As soon as Europe gets fixed, the world's financial attention will be to attack America. And I'm very concerned they'll look at our $16 trillion debt and say that's who's vulnerable. Remember when Dubai got fixed, they went to Greece. When Europe gets fixed, do they come to America? So Unrestricted Warfare had a symposium, and they said in 2009, the way that America gets beat is China and Russia team up, and they dump their dollars, drive the value of the dollar down by 75% overnight. Panarin said that was what would beat us. The Chinese said that's what would beat us. Our own war game in the Pentagon said that's what could beat us. So our federal debt spiraled out of control, making us even more vulnerable. Even the best estimates from the president, we will owe $25 trillion by the year 2022, 10 years from now. We're spending $400 million an hour. So what? In the Middle East, they said the dollar's failed. We've got to get out of the dollar. Here's another thing that's scary to me, and I'm going through this quickly because I know it's late. Did you know that if interest rates rise on U.S. Treasury bonds, even a little bit of 1% rise would cause the value of those bonds to drop 20%? A 2% rise would cause a 40% drop in bond prices? And yet everybody says, I'm getting out of the stock market, I'm selling everything, and where do they put it? They put it into the good old U.S. government. Here's the scarier thing. There are credible proposals being sent around now that they're going to force retirement accounts to have large holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds. There was $1 billion bet placed against America last year. Somebody took $1 billion and bet against the dollar just to test the waters. Zawahiri, who heads Al-Qaeda, has called on all of the Islamic public to get out of dollars and buy gold. Now, people say you can't manipulate stock markets like this, and the big banks and the big brokers, they would never do anything against American interests. Standard Chartered was caught money laundering. HSBC was more recently caught, and they're paying $1 billion fine. But the big banks have been working against U.S. interests for quite some time. And one senior Standard Chartered official in London said, you effing Americans, who are you to tell us, the rest of the world, what to do? So they had $250 billion in Iranian deals, leaving the U.S. financial system vulnerable to terrorists. The Pentagon says China is the #1 world's biggest perpetrator of economic espionage. The Chinese, this is General Xi, in 2005 said, if we have to kill 100 million Americans to make the China century, maybe we should. Unfortunately, he's the PLA and the government of China hasn't gone along yet, but the PLA is growing in influence. And then they say, if we're willing to kill 100 million Americans, why would we shy away from economic warfare? So you may have seen this. Newsmax published this. This is Steve Forbes and Jim Rickards, and they talk about currency wars. Unlike a traditional war, our enemies won't target a city in our borders, a military base abroad. This time they're going to set their crosshairs on you, your bank accounts, your stock brokerage accounts, your life savings, and our currency. Their weapons won't be soldiers, tanks, or missiles. They will covertly attack us using an arsenal of economic weapons of mass destruction. And I just showed you what they did in 2008. How do you beat a superior enemy? Amass a great deal of capital. Launch a sneak attack against the financial markets. After causing a financial crisis, bury a computer virus and hacker detachment, and the goal is to cause the enemy nation to fall into social panic, street riots, and a political crisis. In my pocket, I have 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. If our currency became this worthless, do you think we'd go into crisis? So who have I briefed on the study? Senior past, former head of the CIA, two past and one current head of the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, the SEC, the Department of Defense, senators, congressmen, the FBI, two past attorney generals, and I've done 200 plus meetings at my own expense. Jim Woolsey was one of the first people I talked to. He actually saved my neck, and I'll tell you a very brief story. When I first published this, I was commissioned under George Bush. It was completed under Barack Obama, and when it was first published, I was called and said, this is the most amazing thing. We have to protect our country. We're going to probably move you to Washington. How much money do you need? Let's do a second phase study and let's really catch these guys. And then they called me back and said, we've decided instead of doing that, we're going to classify your research, and if you talk about it, we're putting you in jail. So a friend of mine sent it to Jim Woolsey, who sent it to John McCain, Joe Lieberman, and John Kyle, 3 sitting senators, and said, stick this in your vault. If the Pentagon classifies it, you read it from the Senate floor tomorrow, which was my protection. They came back and apologized. They said, you misunderstood us. Our intention was to protect you. We're not threatening you. So Woolsey's been a good friend. Kevin Hassett, who is a former senior economist for the Federal Reserve Board. Former head of the DIA, Harry Soyster, Lieutenant General Soyster. Jeff Roach, who was the former senior economist of Bank of America, is now a teaching professor at Harvard. Lieutenant General William G. Boykin, good friend Jerry Boykin, who was the head of all Delta forces and at one point was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and the Deputy Director of the CIA. Brilliant guy. Congressman Posey, who is from Florida. Ed Meese, who was Attorney General under Reagan. The Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, which, by the way, there's a whole story with that. I won't bore you, but if you're interested, you can ask me about it afterwards. Frank Gaffney, the head of the Center for Security Policy, and he made me a senior fellow of the center, has been very supportive. Larry Arnn, who's the president of Hillsdale College. The Times of London, who ran a story when I was in Disney World 2 years ago, I guess, when this ran. And I started getting calls from everybody. I had to be on MSNBC, CNBC, Fox, and that's another interesting story. It appeared in the Washington Times. So there's me on CNBC. There's Glenn Beck pointing to the book and saying, buy this book. Mm-hmm. And there's me with Megyn Kelly. And let me tell you one more brief story. When my research first came out, one of my clients, who owns the second largest Steinway dealership in America at the time, in Chicago, Joy is her name. Joy called me and said, I've read your research, you've got to get this on Glenn Beck. And I said, you know what, I'm keeping lid on it until I get approval from the Pentagon, but maybe someday. She said, no, you've got to do it. And I said, let me pray about it. And I prayed about it. And in my heart, no loud voice, no writing in the sky, but in my heart, I heard the Holy Spirit of God tell me, I will get it to Glenn Beck without you lifting a finger. So I didn't send it to him. Didn't do anything with it. On March 2nd, the day that I appeared on CNBC, before my book came out, there was no book, just the Pentagon report. The day I appeared on CNBC, on Fox News, same time, Glenn Beck is holding up my Pentagon report. Someone in the Pentagon had sent it to him, and he's reading it aloud, and he says some fun things like, he said, this is research from a respected Pentagon analyst named Kevin Freeman. Then he said, gosh, this is a little scary. I bet this guy gets invited to fewer parties than I do. And then he said, Kevin Freeman is no kook. So I had friends everywhere calling me, telling me, hey, Glenn says you're no kook, but you know what? It happened without me lifting a finger. So my friend Joy says, you've got to fly to New York immediately, get on a plane, go to New York and see him. I'll pay for the ticket. I said, Joy, let me pray about it. So I got on my knees and I prayed about it. And I heard in my heart, I'm going to bring him to you. I called Joy and said, God says he can bring him to me. Now, Kevin, you're getting a little arrogant to say that Glenn Beck is going to be brought to you. I said, no, that's what, I'll pray again. So I prayed again. And I kid you not, I'll give you the 3 things I heard. And I wrote them down. Number 1, I heard in my heart,